I thought I was a leader because I was successful. But then I had to step away from my business at one point because of a family tragedy. At that moment in time, my businesses weren't important to me. My son was important to me. What I received was I needed to fire some people, but one of the people I needed to fire was me.
How did you come to the conclusion that leadership is so important, and how did you come to that conclusion that maybe some people don't have the same dreams and aspirations that maybe you do?
I think we have the expectation when we hire talent that talent comes with structure.
Your three main responsibilities are vision, people, and capital. The most dangerous thing to do is to take advice from somebody who hasn't been where you want to be.
I would encourage people to lean into their values, hire people that align with those values before we pay too much attention to skill and background.
Welcome everybody to the Albi After Hours podcast, where we talk about propelling the restoration industry forward. My name is Alex Duta, I'm your host, and today I'm super pumped to be in beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona with nobody else but Eugene Hicks. How's it going, Eugene?
Happy to be here. It's a great time of year to be in Scottsdale.
Oh man, it's perfect. I mean, -9 degrees in Chicago, and over here it's like 70s, 80s. We're sitting on the pool deck. So.
Yeah, it was a great day. Hiked Camelback Mountain today.
Yeah.
If you haven't done it, you need to do it.
Yeah.
But sooner than later, or wait till next year because it's going to be hot. But yeah, it's a beautiful day and it's a beautiful place to be. I appreciate you having me.
So Eugene, as I've done like market studies of the restoration industry, I've realized that there's like, on the low end, 20,000 restoration companies. On the high end, I've heard numbers as high as 100,000 restoration companies. And it's a very fragmented market, meaning like there's a lot of companies, but a lot of companies kind of get stuck. Like the average restoration company does like $2 to $3 million a year. And it seems like it plateaus there. And I'm kind of like baffled by this. Do you have any idea why maybe all these companies kind of get stuck at this $2 to $3 million range and don't really grow past that?
For me, it comes down to a proper functional model in the business and really developing that next layer of management and leadership. A lot of businesses that go from zero to, $2 million or $3 million, they're carried by the work in the field and the owner or owners that are really building that business. And the transition that needs to occur in order to double that and start getting into your more 8-figure type businesses is developing leaders. And it's a difficult thing to do for owners. Most of us don't come from any traditional business background. We'll get into where I come from later, but most of us come from doing the work, and we end up being pretty good at it, great individual producers, and we find that we're great at relationships and taking care of customers, and so we go out on our own and we start growing business, and then we reach this point of max on our current ability to manage. And without seeking information or support from people that have been there, and continuing our education, we don't have the tools to really go except for just to push harder. And by doing that, we kind of stagnate.
I see. So yeah, I mean, I could relate to that. Like at a certain point, like even if you work 20 hours a day, you can't make that much impact to move the business forward, right? Like your efforts peter out. But then a lot of people, I think, and actually this is very common, the entire industry has maybe heard that a bit and said, oh, okay, great. Well, I'll just hire a bunch of managers, right? And they'll go in and you see directors of ops, you see mitigation, you see general managers at companies doing $1 million a year, and they have the title of general manager. So we hire these people and we give them the titles, but we're still petering out. Why?
Well, I think we have the expectation when we hire talent that talent comes with structure. And I don't think that's a fair request of an employee to design my business for me. And so as a leader, to develop leaders, our job is to cast the vision. And we're really pretty good at that. I think almost all business owners know what they want to achieve and where they're going, and they can articulate that. But the challenge is, what is my secret sauce? What is the model? And can I articulate that? And if I can articulate that, can I really identify who should be responsible for what? And when we try to solve our problems by hiring a key employee without onboarding them into at least a vision for structure with a proper dialogue that's consistent, a meeting element with this person to collaborate on developing this structure in our business to scale. If we don't do that, then you're really just throwing someone into the fire and expecting them to be great. And sure, I'm sure there's success stories of people coming in and figuring it out, and those are your next owners, right? And I think another mistake that we inherently do, and we've talked about this before, is we'll hire somebody and we'll kind of expect, kind of maybe even subconsciously, that they have the same dreams we do and the same ambition that we do. And we miss the mark there as leaders because maybe they don't. And is it even fair to expect them to have the same dreams that we do, or should we try to figure out what their dream is and nurture that along the way? So it's a very layered problem, and it takes a lot of studying and guidance and networking to really figure out what it should look like.
So it sounds like you know a lot about this problem.
Well, we've seen it a lot, and I've experienced it a lot myself.
Yeah,
so
So
some of our best learning comes from failure. So
I see.
Yeah.
So how did you come to the conclusion that leadership is so important, and how did you come to that conclusion that, you know, maybe some people don't have the same dreams and aspirations that maybe you do?
Well, I think that I had an advantage by getting into ownership at such a young age. You know, I got into franchise ownership at 28 years old, and I made all the mistakes you can make because I was so young and moving so fast, and being that I was, you know, your basic owner, that it was a high individual producer. I just had that expectation for everybody else without any real framework or tools to guide them along the way. So I fell into that trap of just pushing, and really operating out of ego. And, you know, so that was one advantage, coming in young without any of the background and knowledge. So I had to make those mistakes along the way. But those mistakes were really frustrating because I didn't know at the time that they were mistakes. You know, so I just, yeah. And so hindsight's always our best vision. But before that can happen, sometimes life will slap you in the face. And, you know, we all have life that happens to us. Shortly after I got into business, ended up ending my first marriage. And so had to buy another business to afford that exit.
Wow.
And built my teams and was very successful doing that. But what that contributed to was just, again, feeding the ego, because it's like, well, I overcame that and continued growing, and that was no big deal. So I guess I'm doing something right. But then I had to step away from my business at one point because of a family tragedy. I had a son that got sick, and he ended up succumbing to cancer. And obviously that wasn't an overnight situation. You know, very rarely with cancer patients do they wake up one day and then die the next. It's an unfortunate long process. And at that moment in time, my businesses weren't important to me. My son was important to me. And so I stepped away from my businesses and took care of my son. And I did that until he died, and then I stepped back into my business. Unfortunately, when I stepped back into my business, what I saw was not pretty. It was like, oh my gosh, I might lose my business. Wow. Because it was struggling. You know, both of them, I had 2 locations at the time, and they were both struggling. And
Restoration businesses?
Yeah, 2 Service Master franchises. Yeah.
Wow.
They were struggling financially, and you know, I had that moment. I'm not much of a victim, but I got into that victim mindset for 24, 48 hours where it's like, I can't believe this is happening. After that had to happen. Life is so unfair, you know, that sort of thing. And then I quickly got out of that mindset and started getting to work, because that's who we are as operators. You know, we're gritty, and we come from that. And so we dig back in, But I had to ask myself a question that was difficult to answer, and it was, how did this happen? And it's easy to say, well, I have this excuse that my son got sick and died. Like, what do you expect of yourself? What do you expect from me? And that's also a little bit of a victim mentality, where it's like, life happened to me. That's my excuse. That's my out. I'm not accountable for this. And I think what we realize as we get older and we experience things in life, that everything that we experience, negative or positive, we participate in. Yeah. And so that's really where my mindset shifted on leadership. I thought I was a leader because I was successful. I thought I was a leader because everything I've ever tried to do, I've found a way to either win or represent myself really well. And I didn't in this case. And so
you were a high performing individual contributor.
That's all I was, right? And so rather than be like, I can't believe you guys didn't take care of my business, which I think is a trap that you could easily fall into, I realized in that moment that I just wasn't the leader I needed to be. Because if I was the leader I needed to be, and I had built people around me and systems and processes around me for the business to run and thrive, then maybe I would have walked into a different scenario, a better scenario, and I could have continued growing. But instead, what I needed to do is I needed to sell some businesses and start again. Wow. And so that's what I did. And, we slimmed all the way down. We went from, 25 to 30 employees back down to 3.
Wow.
And we started over. And we rebuilt. And that process took about 3.5 or 4 years to get back up to a point where I thought I could exit. And I needed to exit in my mind. I needed to get out. Like, this was such a grind, and it was a grind. But I had a conversation with one of our industry brokers, and I'll go ahead and say his name because I think he's just a wonderful human being and a great resource for all businesses to at least talk to see where you're at, especially if you're thinking about succession or exit. But anyway, I talked to JT Cry with Exit Strategies, a good friend of mine. I really have the utmost respect for him, and got him my numbers, and he just said, look, Eugene, he didn't even charge me. He just said, look, Eugene, you're not ready to sell.
Wow. Well, how did that feel?
It was painful because I was tired. And I guess that was one reason why I wasn't ready to sell, because I was working so dang hard. But he was just very clear in his direction to me. He's like, look, if you want to stay on and bring in a partner, you can do that. But if you want to exit, you're too important to your business. And that's like one of those aha moments, where it's like, okay, I'm almost there, but I'm just not. And so even though it was a tough pill to swallow because I was tired, again, I try not to be a victim. And so it's like, what next? And so this question that stuck with me, that I asked myself that day, that I ask myself to this day, every time I have a challenge I'm facing. And I'll get to that in just a second. So once I got off the phone with JT, I had a beautiful facility. It's 12,000 square foot facility with glass office windows, and pulled up in front of it. And I just sat there for a minute, and I was just reflective, which I think as owners, we all need to take time to do intentionally. But I was peering through the windows, and I just asked myself a question: what needs to be true? And this is the question: what needs to be true for me to exit? What needs to be true to accomplish X? What needs to be true to overcome X? And then you just need to sit silent for a minute and stop thinking and see if you'll receive it. And what I received was, I needed to fire some people. I needed to restructure a little bit more. I wasn't quite there yet, but one of the people I needed to fire was me.
Wow.
And so I walked back to my office, and I made a couple very difficult decisions and communicated to the team that I was firing myself from day to day, and that we were going to train the systems and the processes and offload the functional responsibility that I had in the business. And so I had to transition from running day to day to managing data and guiding people. And that process, this is a 30-second monologue, but that process took 3 more years to do. But by the time I got to that 3-year mark where I did successfully exit, my schedule was pretty easy at that point. I was coming into the office in the morning once the crews were dispatched. And the reason for that was if I show up before the crews to get dispatched, then it's default to my direction. So I needed to stay out of the way to allow my managers to run the crews and have the morning meetings. And then I would have a meeting with my managers after dispatch was done, just to make sure that they didn't need any support from me. Were there any fires to put out? Did they need any solutions? Did I need to do anything or make any phone calls on their behalf? And most of the time the answer was no. And so I'd go to the gym and I'd work out and have lunch, maybe see my wife, and then get back to the office for the afternoon before the crews came back, and just made sure that the day went well, that they didn't need any additional support from me, and did we have a solid plan for tomorrow. And then there were obviously financial things that we looked at, but from the people point of view, that was the cadence. And I'm not recommending that that's how you structure your business, by the way. It was just I needed to prepare to exit, and in order to exit, I needed to be less important. But I also needed to pay attention and keep my eyes on the ball. And that was what I learned from my tragedy is that's the one area where it's not really excuse, it's just environmental. I couldn't have my eye on the ball. But in normal cases, we can and we should. And there's a great book by Keith Cunningham. He's out of Austin, Texas. He's a business consultant. It's called The Road Less Stupid. And I don't know if you've read that book.
Nope.
It's a great book. But what that book lays out is what the CEO should never give away. And pitfalls and stuff along his career as well. But my major takeaways are what the CEO is never supposed to give away. And, your financial review and, KPI checks and those sorts of things is something that you always need to look at. And so I kept those, but that's really how I got to understand what leadership really was in our business. And it tied to all of what we just talked about, And so once I got into consulting after I exited my last business in 2018, I just noticed over the years that middle layer of management in our industry, whether it's a $3 million gross revenue business or 20, there's room for improvement there. And there's not a lot of direction in the industry on what that should look like, what the solutions are, and how that ties to our technology. And so that was our niche for 5 or 6 years now. And I'm back into operations, and I'm partnered with a large 8-figure restoration company now, in addition to the advisory work. But we revisit that leadership model every few months, and we reinforce it every month with our department heads, and we support them and we guide them and we add pieces at all times to help solve problems. But they're solving the problems.
Right. You don't go solve them for them.
We really try not to.
Yeah, I think that's the number one thing. I mean, especially as a extraordinary IC, right? You go into that mode, you could feel like it takes, it's going to take 2 minutes or 5 minutes for me to solve this problem. And it's going to take them 2 hours to go solve the problem. So let me just go take it off their plate and do it. But then that doesn't teach anything. The person doesn't become, they don't expand. So a lot of times it might be very hard to give it back. And then back to the CEO thing, the way I look at it is as a CEO of many companies, well, of one company, and having been the CEO before, it's like your 3 main responsibilities are vision, people, and capital, right? Set the vision of where you're taking this company and why you're doing what you're doing. Go find world-class people to basically get onto this boat, and people that are way more wonderful than you are. And go find the capital strategy, whether it's making sure that you hit certain targets internally, or you find out external capital, whatever it will be, to give the blood to the organization to be able to, for the people to achieve the vision. So, and then when you said, hey, the question I always ask, what needs to hold true? That's beautiful, because at that point you're looking for the positive versus the negative. The other thing that I ask is, if somebody were to buy my business, because you're right, you weren't ready to exit at that point in time, but like somebody would have still probably bought your business on a really crappy valuation. Point proven, if you are to pass away tomorrow and your family sells the business, they're going to get rid of it one way or another. What would be the first thing that they would change is another framework to kind of look at it. And I bet you in that case, if you asked yourself that question too, they'd be like, yep, get rid of these people and remove the key man risk.
Yeah, it's a profound thought to step outside of yourself and look in through the eyes of somebody else.
Yeah.
And that's the exercise, though.
Mm-hmm.
I have to take my ego out of it.
Yep.
And I also have to take my skills out of it and my participation out of it. If I don't exist, but I was buying this business today, what does it need to look like?
Mm-hmm.
Who would I need to hire? What do I need to learn? And where do I want to go with it?
Mm-hmm.
And then what does that look like? And that's an exercise that should be done in perpetuity.
Yep.
And people like you do that.
Yep.
You're constantly redesigning and reevaluating. And if you're a fast-growing business, you might not consciously know that you're doing that too.
Yep.
Because the business is demanding that you do that. And if you don't, then that's the sleepless nights and the failed relationships and the high turnover in your business and your high accounts receivable.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So what I see in your story is like, it almost seems like mindset is everything. I mean, sure, we talked about leading the people and building the people, but it seems like you learn these lessons by shifting your mindset. You know, you talked about the victim mentality versus non-victim mentality, the questions that you're asking and such. For the listener out here that's maybe listening to this podcast, what would you say are like 3 things that they must do, maybe a daily basis, weekly basis, yearly, whatever it might be, to be able to maybe shift their perspective, shift their mindset, mold their mindset, expand their mindset? Because it seems like that's like the end all be all.
Right? It really is. I didn't seek it out. I stumbled into it by, pain and failure, essentially. Not that my businesses weren't successful, they were, but on just an individual, even spiritual level, it was a struggle, of course. And I think most businesses that are ran by owner operated, that probably resonates with them. The sleepless nights or the poor sleep because of the thought loop and everything. And really it comes down to, if you're asking me for 3 things, the very first thing that I would ask myself, assuming my business was successful and I'm just experiencing burnout, is, am I surrounding myself with the right people? And that's not just my employees, although I need to evaluate that.
Yep.
And I need to know what my values are in order to do that.
Yep.
So understanding your values, but the first step is really, who am I surrounding myself with? Yep. And what is that conversation? What are those consistent conversations? What do they look like?
Yep.
And I would encourage people to lean into their values, hire people that align with those values before we pay too much attention to skill and background. Is this someone I could see myself hanging out with and collaborating with? Yes or no?
Yep.
And it's not that you have to be friends with all of your employees. There's reasons not to be in a lot of cases, but you have to respect their value set. Yep. So if we're there, then the next step is to collaborate with people in the industry that are doing the things that you want to do. Ooh. And going places where you want to go. And those individuals are going to talk about everything they've overcame.
Yep.
And that learning curve for you is going to shorten dramatically.
1000%.
And so that's number 1. And then number 2 is really being honest with yourself as a leader. Are you just awesome at what you do? Are you just charismatic? Do you just have great vision? But when it comes to guiding and directing your people, what does that look like? Are you constantly trying to inspire them to do their job or demanding that they do their job? Or are you allowing them to own their job and listen more than you speak?
Wow.
Yeah. The 80-20 rule is something over the last few years that I've really worked hard on getting intentional about, mastering even, if you will. I'm one of those guys that, I come up young and fast, and
Yep.
and so I talked a lot. And it's not that I thought I was smarter than anyone. I just had a lot to say. But leaning into don't dream and think for people, and we need to understand, then now all of a sudden you're in a position where you have to listen.
Yep.
So collaborating and getting feedback on that is important. But in order to do that, we have to set the guardrails and the framework for our people to thrive and succeed. And it is our responsibility to do that. Now, we can hire somebody that comes with that expertise, whether it is a consultant or somebody that has been there, done that we can bring in that complements our skill sets. We talked yesterday a little bit about how Tony Robbins defines business owners and executives, and that is the artist, the entrepreneur, and the manager. And you can be two, very rare to be three, right? But we need all three to be successful. And so, just to speak for myself and my current partner, he's a serial entrepreneur artist. He's got vision and creativity and branding and all of this beautiful things, similar to you, if not the same. Whereas I'm more of a manager entrepreneur, where math makes perfect sense to me, logistics makes perfect sense to me, putting people in the right seats makes perfect sense to me. And you have to be humble enough to surround yourself with people that might be smarter than you in certain areas, or more experienced at the very least. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is you have to know your data, and your team has to know the data. So we need visibility, we need reporting, and we need it at a glance. And so technology is the answer to that, but we have to feed that technology data in, data out. And the framework and building those systems and processes within your business, which can happen as small as $1 million of revenue. You don't have to be a $20 million operation to have systems and processes and key functions and people responsible for things instead of tasking and micromanaging. Right? And look, I've seen businesses that micromanage all the way up to $15-20 million of revenue. I don't know how they do it. It's insane.
Yeah, it's just a dumpster fire.
But it's hard for them, even though they're making money, their quality of life isn't balanced. 100%. So success isn't always defined by how much money you make. It's your life. But those 3 things, who you're surrounding yourself with, are we building around ourselves in the right way with people that can complement our skills? And are we making data-driven decisions all the way through the organization? And are we talking about those metrics, KPIs, on a routine basis or not? And do we have the technology to give us the information we need? Those are the 3 things.
Man, you landed the plane really nicely there, because I think that those restorers that plateau at, a couple $1 million a year, when I talk to them, they're taking advice from maybe their parents or their childhood friends. And I think like the most dangerous thing to do is to take advice from somebody who hasn't been where you want to be. And I've been a victim of that even on my weight loss journey, right? Taking fitness advice from somebody that doesn't have the body that I want. On the second part of they won't relinquish responsibility. I mean, I just invested in a company where the 2 founders basically broke off from another company because they were asking for more response. They were literally the GM and the sales director of this company, and they were, asking for performance-based compensation plans and or equity and or more, power to actually do their jobs, and the owner would literally laugh in their face and not relinquish that control. And then the third thing is, most of these companies don't know their numbers. When I ask people hey, what's your closing rate, or how many jobs did you bring in this month, or even how much revenue did you do last month? They don't know. You ask somebody, hey, how much revenue did you do in a year? They'll tell you, but month over month, split up by division. What was your COGS? What was your gross margin? What was your customer acquisition cost? Simple things those people don't know. So I think you really landed the plane that those are the 3 things that make people plateau.
From my experience, that's what I see.
Interesting. What have you seen any external stories other than your own that kind of fit similar narrative?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of success stories with people that have successfully exited their businesses that we've guided as an ingredient, as my friend Ben Surdy would say, as an ingredient to the recipe, to really complement that company or owner on creating that structure in order to exit. So a lot of the examples that we see, fortunately, they aren't. I've not seen anybody experience the personal trauma that guided me to that place, which is great. But a goal that they have in mind and enough humility to know they need help to get there, and enough trust. So we'll talk, if it's okay, a little bit about Ben Surdy.
Yeah.
If you want to take a second and give a brief background on your knowledge of that, and then I can kind of fill in the blanks.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard bits and pieces of Ben's story. What I know about Ben is that I think at one point in his life he was homeless. So when I think of like trauma and such, I mean, I don't ever compare somebody's trauma to somebody else's trauma, but clearly that was probably a shaping moment in his life. I know he built a world-class organization called Pure Dry and Pure Clean, and that brand. I mean, I know I've rubbed shoulders with a few of his guys through, More Floods Networks and such. I did hear like the story of, a potential buyer coming to potentially buy his business, and him not wanting to sell, and then that buyer saying, okay, well, what number would you want to sell for? Him putting a number on a napkin, that person laughing in their face and saying, you gotta double your business in the next 12 months to do so, and he did just that. So that's kind of a little bit of the backstory that I know, but what would you like to fill in?
Well, your question was, have I seen any other examples of this leadership conversation? And he's just one example, and I can share a couple others too if we have time. But I like sharing Ben's story because he's such a dynamic human being and a great friend of mine. And we share similar backgrounds. And I think that background isn't isolated to just a few of us. I think coming from nothing and being gritty and resilient and determined and focused and just being that prize fighter in our arena that just doesn't stop getting up, that's who he is. And that really resonates with me. And so we made a connection on that level. And, we had a very interesting conversation the first time we spoke, and he'd worked with a few other great industry consultants. But Ben is a different breed. He's a different breed. He's highly intelligent. He's very driven. He's very clear on what he wants, and his end result is proof positive of that. But he had a simple question for me. He's like, why would I hire you? I don't know you. I don't know who you are. Who are you? And I was like, well, you're talking to me for a reason, so you know a little bit about me. And we had a little funny moment there. But my comment to him was like, look, this is a leadership problem that you have to solve in your business. And what I can do on a very short-term basis is just replicate you and duplicate your efforts throughout your team. If you'll trust me to guide them in the direction to get you to the place that you want to be. But I'll only do that if you can admit that you don't know how to get there. And that's profound because, and you talked about it a few days ago, and I talk about it a lot too, is what got us here won't get us there.
100%.
And it's okay not to know. And that's why you bring in support and help, whether it's just a friend that has been there, done that, or a mentor, or somebody that you pay to help you that can get you there. And so all we really did was a couple quarter-inch turns. He had a great organization. I think a lot of industry professionals have great organizations. They just need a little bit here and a little bit there that empower their people. If you're putting out all your fires, if you're driving and pulling your team along with you, you can have the best culture in the world, which I've never seen a better culture than that. Very dynamic, very reward driven, gave back to his employees. So all of the intangibles were there. The energy was high. But there was a lot of stress, and there was a lot of fracturing internally with processing information from the field to the office, to the bank account, basically, to really condense it. And so we just taught those principles, put in the structure, and we found a common ground. nothing in this business that's super successful is cookie cutter. All of our businesses operate a little bit differently. And, you know, when I was consulting full time, one of the hardest objections I had to overcome was, you know, building trust with my client that I'm not just cookie cutter in this, that it's custom to their business. And that's so true. And that's really the secret sauce. And it's hard to duplicate and scale doing that, but you're also giving the most value doing that, really finding what that business needs. And so that's what we did. And then once we proved that out, and cleaned up his systems just a little bit. Like I said, he ran a first class organization, but we increased profitability a little bit. We improved quality of life. We further empowered key employees within the coordinator role of the business. So we stopped treating them like processors and assistants, and we gave them real responsibility and training to produce. And then they tied into the field level, so we broke that disconnect, and that was really successful. But he still had a problem, which was to grow at a rapid rate, and he was mitigation only for the most part. They boutiqued construction a little bit, but he had to get serious and intentional about it. And so we helped build his infrastructure for reconstruction, helped the hiring process there and the functional roles and responsibilities, and we focused on sales and subs. And he took care of the rest. I can't take any more credit for that. That's definitely him and his team. Brought on some key employees. One of them's running the business now, Nick. He's amazing. And that's an example of how effective it can be if you fully buy in. And the reason why we bring up Ben is that he unapologetically pursues his goals. He has no insecurities about it at all. I'm going and I'm going to get that thing. And part of doing that was submitting to support and guidance to get there. And so he did that, and then he took it and made it his own. And we've successfully exited other businesses too that have similar stories. But the real improvement to those businesses that needed to occur in order for them to exit was to beef up leadership so the owner wasn't as relevant to the day-to-day. And that's the short version of it.
It's awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to pour into our audience here at Albi. And thank you for all your support. I mean, it's funny, this is the first time we've met at this Evolve event in face-to-face, but we've been collaborating for, 2 to 3 years now?
Oh, it's more than that. Time flies.
Yeah.
It's been 4 to 5 years.
So if somebody in the audience wants to find you or message you or reach out to you, where could they possibly do that?
Well, I'm not hard to find on LinkedIn or Facebook or any of the social medias. It's just Eugene Hicks. And we're Declaration Consulting, but we're also Organ Restoration. And I always respond. Sometimes it takes me a little while because we're busy guys, but always respond and, happy to help. And, asking a question or advice is free to anyone. I mean, we're here to give back to the industry, to people that want information and knowledge. We want to work with people like that. At the very least on a collaborative basis, that it doesn't take money to be friends, and to support one another in the industry. And that's why I'm here with you, as I respect what you're doing for the industry and the businesses that you're growing. And the people that were at this event were awesome, and they're just thirsty for knowledge. And if we can create value to people that are struggling with answering just simple questions, we want to do that.
Awesome, man. Cool, man. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time here.
Thanks, Alex.